the elegant halls of Bertram's hotel, where chandeliers gleam and secrets whisper, Miss Jane Marple uncovers a chilling truth. Why does a nervous guest vanish without a trace? What hides behind the cryptic notes and shadowy deliveries? As blackmail threatens and danger lurks, can Miss Marple unravel a sinister syndicate before it's too late? Dive into a mystery where every smile conceals a secret. Chapter 1. The charming facade. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over London's Mayfair, where Bertram's hotel stood like a relic of a bygone era. Its Georgian facade, with ivy curling around wrought iron railings, exuded an air of timeless elegance. Miss Jane Marple, her small suitcase in hand, paused on the pavement to admire the polished brass plaque that read Bertram's Hotel, EST, 1840. She adjusted her hat, a modest affair with a single velvet rose, and smiled faintly. A holiday in London, she thought, would do her good, though her sharp eyes already flickered with curiosity, as if sensing the secrets that lay beyond the hotel's gleaming doors. Inside, the lobby was a vision of polished mahogany and soft velvet, the air scented with beeswax and fresh lilies. A crystal chandelier sparkled above, casting prisms of light across the marble floor. Miss Marple's sensible shoes clicked softly as she approached the reception desk, where a young man with slicked back hair and a practiced smile greeted her. "Miss Marple, is it? We've been expecting you," he said, his voice as smooth as the silk scarf tucked into his waistcoat. "I'm Edwin, your concierge. Your room is ready on the 3rd floor, overlooking the garden." "Thank you, Edwin, Miss," Marple replied, her tone warm but measured. She noted the faintest tremor in his fingers as he handed her the Kia brass affair with an ornate bee etched into it. Nerves, perhaps, or something more. She tucked the observation away, like a knitting needle slipped into a ball of wool. As Edwin summoned a porter, Miss Marple's gaze wandered to the lobby's occupants. A silver-haired gentleman in a pinstripe suit read the Times by the fireplace, his monocle glinting. A young couple whispered excitedly near the staircase, their luggage emblazoned with exotic travel stickers. And then there was the woman in the emerald green coat, standing by the revolving door, her gloved hands clutching a small leather case. She glanced repeatedly at the street outside, her posture rigid, as if expecting someone or something. "Pardon me, miss," came a gruff voice. The doorman, a burly man with a weathered face and a cap slightly askew, addressed the woman in green. "You waiting for a cab? I can hail one." The woman flinched, her eyes darting to him. No, thank you," she stammered, her voice betraying a faint foreign accent. "French. Perhaps I'm meeting someone." She turned abruptly, her heels clicking as she retreated toward the lounge. Miss Marple's lips pursed ever so slightly. The woman's unease was palpable, like a dropped stitch in an otherwise perfect row. She followed the porter to the lift, her mind already threading together the fragments of what she'd seen. The hotel, for all its charm, had a pulse of something unspoken, something that hummed beneath its polished surface. Her room was as delightful as promised, with chintz, curtains, and a 4-poster bed draped in crisp linens. A vase of roses sat on the bureau, their scent mingling with the faint tints of furniture polish. Miss Marple unpacked her few belongings: a shawl, a novel by Dorothy L. Sayers, and her knitting bag. Then settled by the window. The garden below was a neat square of manicured hedges and blooming dahlias. But her attention drifted to the street, where the woman in green now stood, speaking animatedly to a man in a dark overcoat. He was too far for Miss Marple to discern his features, but his gestures were sharp, almost commanding. The woman handed him the leather case, and he vanished into the crowd. Curious, Miss Marple murmured, her fingers absently tracing the handle of her knitting bag. She decided to explore the hotel before dinner, hoping to glean more about its enigmatic guests. The lounge was a hive of activity as evening settled in. Waiters glided between tables, bearing silver trays of scones and porcelain teapots. Miss Marple chose a corner table, her back to the wall, offering a clear view of the room. She ordered a pot of Earl Grey and opened her novel, though her eyes rarely strayed from the pages. The silver-haired gentleman from the lobby now sat with a younger man, their heads bent close over a ledger. The young couple, still brimming with excitement, pored over a map of London, debating whether to visit the British Museum or Covent Garden. Then, the woman in green reappeared, sans her leather case. She sat alone, her hands twisting a napkin into knots. Miss Marple noted the absence of a wedding ring, though a faint indentation on her finger suggested one had been there recently. A widow, or something less conventional. The woman's eyes scanned the room, lingering on the doorman, who now stood by the lounge entrance, polishing a brass ashtray with unnecessary vigor. "May I join you?" A voice interrupted Miss Marple's thoughts. A woman of about 40, with auburn hair pinned in an elegant chignon, stood before her. Her dress, a tailored navy number, spoke of wealth but not ostentation. "I'm Mrs. Evelyn Harcourt. I couldn't help but notice you're alone, and I do hate dining solo." Miss Marple smiled, gesturing to the empty chair. "Please, do. I'm Jane Marple, from St. Mary Mead. Are you staying long at Bertram's?" Mrs. Harcourt settled into the seat, her movements graceful but deliberate. "A week, perhaps 2. My husband's away on business, and I fancied a bit of London's charm. This place is rather like stepping into a novel, don't you think? All creaking floors and whispered secrets." Miss Marple chuckled, though her eyes flickered with interest. "Oh, I dare say every old hotel has its stories, though some are more intriguing than others." Their conversation flowed easily, touching on London's theatres and the unseasonably warm autumn. But Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a sudden commotion at the lounge entrance. The doorman, whose name tag read Alfie, was speaking, in hushed tones, to Edwin, the concierge. Their exchange was brief but intense, with Alfie gesturing toward the street. Edwin's face tightened, and he slipped something, a folded piece of paper, into Alfie's pocket before hurrying away. Mrs. Harcourt followed Miss Marple's gaze. "The staff here are awfully attentive, aren't they?" she remarked, her tone light but probing. "Almost too attentive, if you ask me." "Indeed," Miss Marple replied, her voice soft. "One wonders what keeps them so busy." She sipped her tea, her mind racing. The paper, the nervous woman, the man in the overcoat was a puzzle, and she was only just beginning to see its shape as the evening wore on. Miss Marple excused herself, claiming a need to rest before dinner. In truth, she wanted a moment to observe the lounge from a different vantage point. She lingered by a potted palm near the entrance, her small figure blending into the shadows. The woman in green rose abruptly, her napkin falling to the floor, and hurried toward the lobby. Alfie, the doorman, watched her go, his expression unreadable. Then, as if by chance, Miss Marple's foot nudged the fallen napkin. She bent to retrieve it, her fingers brushing against something tucked inside a tiny slip of paper, no bigger than a postage stamp. Unfolding it, she saw a single line scrawled in hurried ink: "Delivery at midnight. Don't be late." Her heart quickened, though her face remained serene. She tucked the note into her sleeve and returned to her table, where Mrs. Harcourt was now chatting with a waiter about the dessert menu. Miss Marple resumed her seat, her mind alight with possibilities. A delivery at midnight. It could be innocent package, a letter. But the woman's fear, Alfie's agitation, and Edwin's furtive exchange suggested otherwise. As the lounge filled with the clink of teacups and the murmur of conversation, Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes bright with resolve. Bertram's hotel was indeed charming, but beneath its polished veneer, something stirred, something dark, something dangerous. She would watch, and she would listen. For now, that was enough. The chapter closed with Miss Marple retiring to her room, the note safely hidden in her knitting bag. She sat by the window, gazing at the garden now cloaked in twilight, and murmured to herself, a charming facade, indeed. But facades, my dear, are meant to be peeled away. Chapter 2. Whispers in the tea room the following afternoon. Miss Jane Marple settled into the tea room of Bertram's hotel, a cosy enclave of damask tablecloths and gleaming silver. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating a mural of pastoral scenes that adorned one wall. The air was fragrant with bergamot and freshly baked scones. But Miss Marple's attention was fixed on the guests, her knitting needles clicking softly as she observed them over the rim of her spectacles. The note from the previous evening delivery at midnight, "Don't be late," lay tucked in her handbag, a silent spur to her curiosity. The tea room buzzed with a genteel hum of conversation. At a nearby table, a haughty woman in a mink stole, whom Miss Marple had learned was Lady Beatrice Worthington, sipped her tea with an air of disdain. Her sharp eyes darted toward a portly man in a tweed suit, who was scribbling furiously in a notebook. Miss Marple had overheard his name Mr. Reginald Poole, a businessman with a penchant for loud ties and louder opinions. Across the room, a glamorous woman in a crimson dress, introduced as Miss Clara Vane, an actress of some repute, laughed brightly at a waiter's jest. Though her smile faltered when she thought no one was watching, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on Clara, whose fingers toyed nervously with a pearl necklace. There was a fragility to her, like a porcelain cup on the edge of a shelf. The woman in the emerald green coat from the previous day was absent, but her unease seemed to linger in the air, as if the hotel itself held its breath. "More tea, madam." A waitress, her apron crisp as new snow, hovered at Miss Marple's elbow. Her name tag read Lillian, and her youthful face bore a trace of weariness. "Thank you, Lillian," Miss Marple said kindly. "It's a lovely room, isn't it? So many interesting people." Lillian's smile was polite but strained. "Oh yes, madam. All sorts come to Bertram's." She poured the tea and hurried away, glancing over her shoulder as if summoned by an unseen signal. Miss Marple's needles paused. Lillian's haste was telling, much like the tremor in Edwin's fingers the day before. She resumed knitting, her mind threading together the hotel's subtle discords. The note about the midnight delivery suggested something clandestine, but what? A smuggling operation, a rendezvous. She needed more pieces to this puzzle. Her thoughts were interrupted by a rustle at the next table. Lady Beatrice had dropped her fan, and as she bent to retrieve it, a folded letter slipped from her handbag onto the carpet. Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the motion. The letter was sealed with red wax, its edges worn as if handled repeatedly. Lady Beatrice, oblivious, straightened and resumed her conversation with a companion, a dear woman in grey who nodded absent-lie. Miss Marple considered her options. To retrieve the letter would be bold, perhaps too bold for a guest in a strange hotel, yet her curiosity, honed by years in St. Mary Mead, was insatiable. She set her knitting aside and rose, feigning a need to adjust her shawl. As she passed Lady Beatrice's table, she stooped gracefully, as if to tie her shoelace, and palmed the letter, slipping it into her sleeve with the practiced ease of a conjurer. Back at her table, she unfolded the letter beneath the cover of her napkin. The handwriting was sharp, almost aggressive, and the words sent a chill through her. "Pay by Friday, or the truth about Paris will be known. Room 312, 10 p.m. Blackmail." The word hung in Miss Marple's mind like a storm cloud. Room 312, she recalled. It was on the same floor as her own. The letter bore no signature, only a faint smudge of ink that suggested haste. She glanced at Lady Beatrice, whose powdered cheeks now seemed to mask a deeper anxiety. Was she the victim? Or was she complicit in something darker? As Miss Marple tucked the letter away, Clara Vane rose from her table, her crimson dress catching the light like a flame. She crossed the room, pausing to exchange pleasantries with Mr. Poole, who flushed and fumbled his notebook. Clara's laughter was musical, but her eyes were shadowed, and when she passed Miss Marple's table, she dropped a silk handkerchief embroidered with a delicate CV. "Oh dear me," Miss Marple said softly, as if to herself, but loud, enough for Clara to hear. "You've dropped something, miss." Clara turned, her expression a mix of surprise and gratitude. "How careless of me," she said, retrieving the handkerchief. "Thank you." "Miss Marple," she supplied, her smile disarming. "You must be Miss Vane. I saw your performance in the moonlit stage last season. Quite unforgettable." Clara's face lit up, though the strain remained. "You're too kind. It's rare to meet someone who remembers that play." She hesitated, then added, "Might I sit for a moment? I could use a friendly face." "Of course," Miss Marple said, gesturing to the empty chair. "Tea rooms are perfect for confidences. Don't you find?" Clara laughed, a brittle sound, and sat. "They are, though this one feels watchful." She lowered her voice. "Have you noticed how the staff seem to know everything? It's uncanny." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic. "Hotels like this do have eyes and ears. But tell me, my dear, you seem a touch unsettled. Is everything all right?" Clara's fingers tightened around the handkerchief. "It's nothing, really. Just the nerves of an actress. London can be overwhelming." But her eyes betrayed her, flickering toward the door where Lillian had disappeared. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. Clara's unease mirrored the woman in greens from the previous day, though their demeanors couldn't be more different. Was Clara entangled in the same web? The letter's mention of Paris and room 312 suggested a network of secrets, and Miss Marple suspected Bertram's was its hub. Their conversation turned to lighter matters, the weather, the charm of Bertram's scones, but Miss Marple steered it gently, probing without seeming to pry. Clara revealed she was staying for a week, preparing for a new role. But her answers grew vague when pressed about her plans. As they spoke, Miss Marple noticed Mr. Poole watching them, his pen poised over his notebook as if taking notes. The tea room began to empty, and Clara excused herself, citing a rehearsal. Miss Marple watched her go, then turned her attention to the letter. She couldn't keep it. Lady Beatrice might notice its absence, but she could return it discreetly. She rose, her shawl draped over her arm, and approached Lady Beatrice's table, where the older woman was now alone, her companion having stepped away. "Pardon me, Lady Beatrice," Miss Marple said, her voice soft as a breeze. "I believe you dropped this earlier." She held out the letter, her face a mask of innocent concern. Lady Beatrice's eyes widened, and she snatched the letter with a trembling hand. "Oh, how careless of me. Thank you, Miss Marple," she replied. "No trouble at all." Lady Beatrice murmured her thanks and tucked the letter into her handbag, her composure fraying like old lace. Miss Marple returned to her table, her heart quickening. The letter's contents confirmed her suspicions. Bertram's was a stage for more than polite society. Blackmail was afoot, and the hotel staff, with their watchful eyes, might be complicit. As she gathered her knitting, Lillian reappeared, clearing a nearby table. Miss Marple caught her eye and smiled. "You've a busy day, haven't you, Lillian? So many guests to tend to." Lillian nodded, her hands unsteady as she stacked plates. "Yes, madam, never a dull moment." She paused, then added in a whisper, "Some guests are more trouble than others." Miss Marple's smile didn't waver, but her mind seized on. "The words, trouble?" she asked gently. "I do hope everyone's behaving." Lillian flushed and hurried away, leaving Miss Marple with a new thread to follow. The chapter closed as she sipped the last of her tea, the letter's warning and Lillian's cryptic remarks swirling in her thoughts. The tea room, with its polished charm, was a facade for whispers of deceit. She would return the letters, secret to her memory, like a stitch held for later, and watch for the next clue to Bertram's dark underbelly. Chapter 3. The Vanishing Guest. The morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of Bertram's hotel, casting a soft glow over the breakfast room. Miss Jane Marple sat at her usual corner table, a plate of toast and marmalade before her, though her attention was elsewhere. The cryptic note from Chapter 1, delivery at midnight, "Don't be late," and the blackmailed letter from Chapter 2, with its ominous mention of Paris and room 312, had sharpened her senses. The hotel's polished charm was a veneer, and she was determined to uncover what lay beneath. The breakfast room was quieter than the tea room had been the previous day. Lady Beatrice Worthington was absent, perhaps nursing her rattled nerves. Mr. Reginald Poole, the businessman with the loud tie, was engrossed in a stack of papers, his fork hovering forgotten over his eggs. Miss Clara Vane, the actress, sat near the window, her crimson lipstick a stark contrast to her pale complexion as she sipped coffee and stared into the distance. But it was the absence of another guest that caught Miss Marple's notice. Mr. Harrow, a slight nervous man she'd seen in the lobby on her first day, was nowhere to be seen. Mr. Harrow had been unremarkably grey suit, a balding head, and a habit of clutching a worn briefcase, but his absence felt significant. Miss Marple recalled his fleeting presence at dinner the previous evening, where he'd sat alone, his eyes darting toward the door as if expecting an interruption. Now his table was empty, the chair neatly tucked in as if he'd never been. There she signalled to Lillian, the waitress from the tea room, who approached with a tray of fresh pastries. "Good morning, Lillian," Miss Marple said, her voice warm. "I don't see Mr. Harrow today. Is he taking breakfast in his room?" Lillian's hand faltered, a croissant slipping slightly on the tray. "Mr. Harrow, oh, I believe he checked out early, madame." Her eyes avoided Miss Marple's, and she hurried to another table. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Lillian's hesitation was as telling as a dropped stitch in a pattern. Checked out. Mr. Harrow's agitation last night suggested he wasn't the sort to leave abruptly without a word. She finished her toast, her mind weaving possibilities. A sudden departure could be innocent, family emergency, perhaps, but paired with the hotel's undercurrents of secrecy. It felt like another piece of the puzzle. After breakfast, Miss Marple decided to investigate. She approached the reception desk, where Edwin, the concierge, was sorting a stack of envelopes. His smile was as polished as ever, but his eyes flickered with something guarded. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said. "How may I assist you?" "Was just wondering about Mr. Harrow," she replied, her tone light. "Such a quiet gentleman. I heard he left early." Edwin's fingers paused on the envelopes. "Mr. Harrow, yes, he settled his bill last night and left before dawn. A sudden business matter, I believe." He flashed a smile that didn't reach his eyes and turned to answer a telephone. Miss Marple nodded, but her suspicions deepened. Edwin's explanation was too smooth, like a rehearsed line. She decided to visit the third floor, where Mr. Harrow's room, number 307, she'd overheard was located, just a few doors from her own and near the mysterious room 312 mentioned in the blackmail letter. The corridor was silent, its thick carpet muffling her steps. The door to room 307 was ajar, and a maid was inside, stripping the bed with brisk efficiency. Miss Marple hesitated, then knocked gently. "Oh, excuse me," she said, feigning surprise. "I thought this was my room. Such a muddle with these doors." The maid, a young woman with a tight bun and a name tag reading Dora, looked up. "No trouble, madame. This room's empty now. Just cleaning up." "Empty," Miss Marple said, her eyes wide with innocent curiosity. "Wasn't this Mr. Harrow's room? I saw him here yesterday." Dora's hands slowed as she folded a sheet. "He left sudden-like, I heard. No mess though, neatest guest I ever cleaned for." She resumed her work, but her tone suggested she'd said more than intended. Miss Marple lingered, her gaze sweeping the room. The surfaces gleamed, the wardrobe stood empty, and the waste-bin was spotless too spotless. No guest, however neat, left a room so pristine. She thanked Dora and stepped back into the corridor, her mind racing. A cleaned room could hide more. Then dust stopped back in her own room. Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting in her lap. She needed evidence, something tangible. The idea of returning to room 307 nagged at her, but the maid's presence made that impractical. Instead, she recalled a trick from her nephew Raymond, who once found a lost letter in a hotel waste-bin. Waste-bins were often overlooked, especially if the staff believed a room was already cleared. She waited until the corridor was quiet, then slipped back to room 307. The door was now closed, but unlocked. Inside, the room was as Dora had left it, the bed bare and the curtains drawn. Miss Marple moved to the waste-bin, which sat discreetly beside the desk. It appeared empty, but she tipped it gently, and a small scrap of paper fluttered out, caught in the seam of the liner. She retrieved it, her heart quickening. The scrap was torn, but a series of numbers and letters were scrawled across it in pencil. 471982 LS. The writing was hurried, the pencil marks smudged. Miss Marple tucked the scrap into her sleeve and returned to her room, her mind alight with possibilities. The numbers suggested a code, perhaps a safe combination or a reference to something more sinister. LS could be initials, but whose? She sat at her writing desk, a fresh sheet of notepaper before her, and began to puzzle out the code. The numbers didn't align with a date or a room number, but they reminded her of a cipher she'd once seen in a wartime novel. She tested a few patterns, her pencil scratching softly. After several minutes, a hypothesis formed. The numbers could be a reference to a ledger or account, and else might point to a person or place. The hotel's connections to blackmail and mysterious deliveries suggested a criminal network. And Mr. Harrow's sudden departure felt like a thread in that web. To test her theory, Miss Marple visited the hotel library, a small room lined with leather-bound books and a single typewriter. She browsed the shelves, ostensibly looking for a novel, but her eyes scanned for anything out of place. Near the window, she noticed a stack of financial magazines, their pages dog-eared. Flipping through one, she found a faint pencil mark circling. An article about offshore accounts, a clue, perhaps, to the codes, meaning. As she left the library, she passed Alfie, the doorman, who was adjusting a notice board in the hall. His cap was tilted, and his hands fumbled with a pin. "Good day, madam," he said, his voice gruff but polite. "Good day, Alfie," Miss Marple replied, pausing. "You must see all sorts come and go here. Poor Mr. Harrow left so quickly, didn't he?" Alfie's jaw tightened, and he glanced down the hall. Some folk are in a hurry. Can't say I know much about it." He turned back to the notice board, but his shoulders were stiff. Miss Marple smiled and moved on, her suspicions confirmed. Alfie's unease, like Lillian's and Edwin's, pointed to a shared secret. The scrap of paper, with its cryptic code, was a tangible link to Mr. Harrow's disappearance, and she suspected it tied to a larger operation, perhaps the same one. Behind the midnight delivery and the blackmail letter, the chapter closed as Miss Marple returned to her room, the scrap of paper safely hidden in her knitting bag. She sat by the window, gazing at the garden now dappled with late morning light. The code was a breakthrough, hinting at a syndicate operating within Bertram's walls. Mr. Harrow's vanishing act was no coincidence, and she would watch closely for the next clue, her resolve as steady as her knitting needles. Chapter 4. Shadows in the corridor. The clock in Miss Jane Marple's room chimed 11 as she sat by her bedside lamp, her knitting needles idle for once. The events of the past days at Bertram's hotel, the cryptic note about a midnight delivery, the blackmail letter mentioning Paris and room 312, and the coded scrap linked to Mr. Harrow's disappearance had woven a tapestry of suspicion in her mind. The hotel's elegance was a mask, and tonight she resolved to catch a glimpse of what lay behind it. The note's mention of midnight lingered like a shadow, urging her to stay alert. Miss Marple had dined lightly in her room, citing a headache to avoid the bustling dining room. In truth, she wanted freedom to move unnoticed. She slipped into a dark cardigan, her soft-soled shoes silent on the carpet, and checked her watch. 11:45 p.m. The corridor outside her room on the third floor was hushed, the sconces casting pools of light that barely reached the corners. She stepped out, her small figure blending into the shadows, and moved toward the staircase, where a service door marked staff only stood at the end of the hall. As she passed room 312, she paused, her ear close to the door. No sound came from within, but the number loomed large in her thoughts, tied to the blackmail letter. She continued, her steps cautious, until a faint creak stopped her. Ahead, near the service door, a figure emerged from the gloom, a man, tall and lean, his face obscured by a fedora pulled low. He moved with purpose, slipping through the door with a glance over his shoulder. Miss Marple's heart quickened. She waited, counting to 10, then followed, easing the service door open. It led to a narrow staircase, dimly lit by a single bulb. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of laundry starch and damp stone. She descended, her hand on the rail, until she reached a basement landing. Voices drifted from a half-open door ahead, low and urgent. She crept closer, her breath shallow, and crouched behind a stack of folded linens. "Can't afford another mistake," one voice said, sharp and authoritative. "The package is late, and they're getting impatient." "It's not my fault," another replied, defensive, with a hint of a London accent. "Harrow was supposed to handle it, but he's gone." Miss Marple's pulse raced. Harrow, Mr. Harrow, the vanished guest. She recognized the second voice. Mr. Langley, the hotel's charming manager, whom she'd met briefly at check-in. His usual polish was absent, replaced by a tense edge. The first voice was unfamiliar, but its commanding tone suggested someone accustomed to obedience. She peered through the crack in the door. Mr. Langley stood in a cluttered storage room, facing a man in a tailored suit, his back to her. Shelves lined with cleaning supplies and spare linens framed the scene, and a single lantern cast stark shadows. Langley's hands were clenched, his face pale. "We'll get it sorted," he said. "But we need more time. Time that—" Other man snapped, his voice like a whip. "You've had enough. If it's not here by tomorrow, you'll answer for it." He turned slightly, revealing a sharp jawline and a scar above his eyebrow, but his face remained half hidden. Miss Marple memorized the details, her mind racing. A package. Late could it be, the delivery at midnight from the note? And Harrow's name, tied to this clandestine meeting, confirmed her suspicion that his disappearance was no coincidence. She shifted slightly, her knee brushing a folded towel, which slid to the floor with a soft thud. The voices stopped. "What was that?" the scarred man hissed. Miss Marple froze, her heart pounding. Langley stepped toward the door, his shoes clicking on the concrete. She pressed herself against the linens, willing herself to blend into the shadows. The door creaked wider, and Langley's silhouette filled the frame. For a moment, she thought he'd see her, but a distant clanker, perhaps a pipe in the basement, drew his attention. "Just the building," he muttered, stepping back. The scarred man grunted. "Get it done, Langley. No excuses." He strode out, his footsteps fading up the staircase. Miss Marple waited until Langley followed, then exhaled, her hands trembling. She'd been inches from discovery, but the risk had yielded a crucial thread. Langley was entangled in something illicit, and Harrow's absence was central to it. She retraced her steps, slipping back to the third floor without incident, her mind alight with questions. In her room, she locked the door and sat at her writing desk. The coded scrap from Mr. Harrow's room, 47-19-82 LS, before her. The conversation she'd overheard suggested a criminal operation, possibly tied to the code. LSS could be Langley's initials, though she hadn't learned his first name. Or perhaps it referred to the scarred man, whose identity remained a mystery. She jotted notes in her neat handwriting, linking the package to the delivery and the blackmail letters, threat dot, to clear her head. She decided to take a late-night stroll through the hotel's public areas, where she might observe more without arousing suspicion. The lobby was quiet, save for a night porter polishing the brass railing. Miss Marple settled into an armchair near the fireplace, her knitting in hand, and watched the room. The porter, a wiry man with a scar on his knuckle, glanced at her but said nothing as she knitted. A woman entered the lobby from the street, her coat damp from a sudden drizzle. It was the woman in the emerald green coat from her first day, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. She approached the reception desk, where a night clerk was sorting keys. "Any messages for room 305? She asked, her voice low. The clerk shook his head. "Nothing. Miss Dubois. Miss Dubois, Miss Dubois noted the name, her needles clicking steadily. The woman's agitation was unchanged from 2 days ago, but now she carried no leather case. Had she delivered it, as Miss Marple had seen in the street? She filed the observation away, sensing a connection to the basement conversation. The night porter, finishing his task, approached Miss Dubois. "Need a cab?" Miss Key asked, his tone neutral. "No," she snapped, then softened. "I'm sorry, I'm just tired." She hurried toward the lift, her heels echoing in the empty lobby. "Miss..." Marple's eyes narrowed. The porter's offer was polite, but his scar and his watchful gaze reminded her of the man in the basement. Could they be the same? The lighting had been poor, and she couldn't be certain. She made a mental note to learn more about the porter, whose name tag she hadn't seen. Returning to her room, Miss Marple reviewed her findings. The overheard conversation confirmed Langley's role in a shadowy operation, likely tied to the coded scrap and the midnight delivery. Mr. Harrow's disappearance was no mere departure, and Miss Dubois's distress suggested she, too, was entangled. The blackmail letter, with its reference to room 312, might connect to the same network, though its exact role was unclear. She opened her window, letting the cool night air clear her thoughts. The garden below was dark, its dahlias mere silhouettes. As she gazed out, a flicker of movement caught her ogier figure, cloaked in shadow, crossing the garden toward a side gate. The gate creaked shut, and the figure was gone. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Another piece of the puzzle, but too fleeting to place. She closed the window and sat, her knitting resumed as a way to steady her nerves. The chapter closed with her. Resolve strengthened. Langley was a key player, and the hotel's corridors hid more than shadows. The coded scrap was safe in her knitting bag, and tomorrow she would seek out Miss Dubois or probe the staff further. For now, she'd uncovered a vital clue: the manager's voice in a secret meeting, tied to a missing guest and a mysterious package. Bertram's dark underbelly was beginning to show, and Miss Marple was determined to expose it, one stitch at a time. Chapter 5. The actress's secret. The late afternoon sun bathed Bertram's hotel in a warm amber glow. But Miss Jane Marple felt a chill as she sat in the hotel's drawing room, a delicate sherry glass in hand. The threads of mystery she'd gathered: the cryptic note about a midnight delivery, the blackmail letter mentioning Paris and room 312, the coded scrap tied to Mr. Harrow's disappearance, and Mr. Langley's clandestine basement meeting wove a complex pattern. In her mind, each clue pointed to a hidden operation within the hotel's elegant walls, and she was determined to unravel it. The drawing room, with its brocade armchairs and gilt-framed mirrors, was quieter than the tea room, its atmosphere intimate yet charged. Miss Marple had chosen a seat near a bay window, her knitting bag at her side, offering a clear view of the room's occupants. Mr. Reginald Poole was absent, likely buried in his papers, but Lady Beatrice Worthington sat stiffly in a corner, her eyes darting to the door. Miss Clara Vane, the actress, occupied a velvet settee, her crimson dress replaced by a muted grey ensemble that did little to dim her radiance. Yet her hands twisted a lace handkerchief, betraying an inner turmoil. Miss Marple had noted Clara's unease in the tea room the previous day, her cryptic remark about the staff's watchfulness lingering in her memory. The actress's poise was a performance, and Miss Marple suspected she held a key to the hotel's secrets, perhaps linked to the blackmail letter or the mysterious Miss Dubois. She decided to approach her, sensing an opportunity to gain an ally. As a waiter passed with a tray of drinks, Miss Marple caught Clara's eye and smiled. "Miss Vane, might I trouble you for a moment's company? I find these quiet evenings perfect for a chat." Clara hesitated, then crossed the room, her movements graceful but guarded. "Of course, Miss Marple," she said, settling beside her. "I could use a distraction." Her voice was light, but her eyes were shadowed. Like clouds over a summer sky, they spoke of trivialities, at first the charm of London's parks, the latest West End plays, but Miss Marple steered the conversation. Gently, her tone warm and disarming. "You must lead such an exciting life," she said. "All those roles, all those cities. It's a wonder you find time to rest in a place like Bertram's." Clara's smile wavered. "It's not as glamorous as it sounds. Sometimes the past catches up." She glanced at the window, her fingers tightening on the handkerchief. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a soothing rhythm. "The past can be a heavy burden," she said, her voice gentle. "I've known many in my village who've carried secrets they longed to share. A kind ear can lighten the load." Clara's gaze met hers, searching. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the distant clink of glasses. Then, in a whisper, Clara spoke. "You're kind, Miss Marple. Kinder than most here. I'm in a bit of trouble. Someone knows something about me, something from years ago in Paris. They're threatening to ruin me." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. Paris, the word echoed the blackmail. Letters, threat. "My dear," she said, leaning closer, "that sounds dreadful. Can you tell me more? I'm no stranger to discretion." Clara's eyes welled with tears, quickly blinked away. "It was a foolish mistake, a brief affair with a man I shouldn't have trusted. He was married, and I was young, naive. Now someone's found out, and they want money more than I can pay. They left a note in my room, demanding I meet them in room 312 tomorrow night." Miss Marple's mind raced. Room 312 again, tying Clara's plight to Lady Beatrice's letter. "Have you seen this person?" she asked. Clara shook her head. "Only notes slipped under my door. But I think the staff know more than they let on. That concierge, Edwin, he watches me like he's waiting for something." Miss Marple nodded, recalling Edwin's guarded demeanour and Langley's tense basement conversation. "You're very brave to share this," she said. "If you'll trust me, I might be able to help. Do you have the note?" Clara hesitated, then reached into her handbag and produced a folded paper, its edges creased. Miss Marple unfolded it. Carefully, her eyes scanning the typed words. £5,000 by tomorrow. Room 312, 10 p.m. Or the papers, get your secret. No signature, but the style matched the letter she'd found in the tea room. "This is serious," my dear Miss Marple said, handing the note back. "But you're not alone. Keep this safe, and don't go to that meeting. I'll see what I can learn." Clara's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't know who to turn to, but there's something else." She reached into her handbag again, producing a small brass key, its surface etched with a faint B. "I found this in my room, hidden in a drawer. I think it's to a safety deposit box, but I don't know where." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. A key perhaps to a box holding evidence of the blackmail or the mysterious package mentioned in the basement. "May I hold on to it?" she asked. "I'll keep it safe and see if I can find its purpose." Clara nodded, pressing the key into Miss Marple's hand. "Please, be careful. I don't know who to trust here." As Clara returned to her settee, Miss Marple tucked the key into her knitting bag, her mind alight. The key was a tangible clue, linking Clara's blackmail to the hotel's broader secrets. Room 312 was a nexus, and the Staffordwin, Langley, perhaps others were complicit. She needed to confirm the key's purpose, but caution was paramount. The drawing room began to empty, and Miss Marple rose, intending to retire early. As she crossed the lobby, she noticed Alfie, the doorman, lingering near the reception desk, his cap tilted as he spoke to the night clerk. Their conversation was hushed, and Alfie's hand slipped something a small envelope into his pocket. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Alfie's unease, like Edwin's and Lillian's, suggested he was part of the same web. She took the lift to the 3rd floor, her thoughts on room 312. Passing its door, she paused, tempted to try the key, but the risk was too great. Instead, she returned to her room and examined the key under her lamp. Its design matched the hotel's aesthetic, suggesting a safety deposit box in the manager's office or a private lounge. She hid it in a false bottom of her knitting bag, a precaution learned from a past case in St. Mary Mead. As she prepared for bed, a soft knock startled her. She opened the door to find Lillian, the waitress, her face pale. "Miss Marple," she whispered, glancing down the corridor. "I shouldn't be here, but I heard you talking to Miss Vane. Be careful, there are eyes everywhere." Before Miss Marple could respond, Lillian hurried away, her footsteps fading. The warning echoed Clara's fears, confirming the staff's involvement. Miss Marple locked her door, her resolve firm. The key was a breakthrough, and Clara's trust was a vital step. Tomorrow, she'd seek the safety deposit box and probe further into room 312's significance. The chapter closed as Miss Marple gazed out her window at the darkened garden, the key's weight of promise in her knitting bag. Bertram's secrets were unraveling, and Clara's confession had drawn her deeper into the mystery. The actress's secret was a thread in a larger tapestry, and Miss Marple would follow it, stitch by careful stitch, until the hotel's dark underbelly lay bare. Chapter 6. The doorman's tale. The morning mist clung to the cobblestones outside Bertram's hotel, softening the outlines of Mayfair's elegant streets. Miss Jane Marple stood by the hotel's entrance, her umbrella tucked under her arm, ostensibly waiting for a taxi. In truth, she was watching Alfie, the doorman, whose burly frame and weathered cap had become a fixture in her observations. The clues she'd gathered: the midnight delivery note, the blackmail letter tied to room 312, the coded scrap from Mr. Harrow's room, Mr. Langley's secretive meeting, and Clara Vane's brass key pointed to a criminal web spun within the hotel's walls. Alfie's unease, glimpsed in fleeting moments, suggested he was a thread in that web, and Miss Marple intended to tug gently to see what unravelled. Alfie was polishing the brass handle of the revolving door, his movements methodical but distracted. His eyes flicked toward the street, where a delivery van idled, its driver obscured by a fogged window. Miss Marple noted the van's lack of markings, a detail that pricked her curiosity. Given the talk of a package in the basement, she approached Alfie, her smile as warm as a village hearth. "Good morning, Alfie," she said, adjusting her scarf. "Such a damp day, isn't it? You must see all sorts come through these doors." Alfie paused, his cloth stilling. "Morning, miss," he replied, his voice gruff but polite. "Aye, all sorts, and then some. Keeps me on my toes." He resumed polishing, but his shoulders tensed, as if her presence unsettled him. Miss Marple tilted her head, her tone light. I imagine you know the hotel's rhythms better than most. All those comings and goings, packages, guests, messages. It must be quite a responsibility. Alfie's hand faltered, and he glanced at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. Just do my job, miss. Don't ask too many questions. He turned back to the door, but his words carried a weight that confirmed her suspicions. Alfie was more than a doorman. She lingered, undeterred, watching as the delivery van pulled away. I suppose you're right, she said, as if conceding. But I couldn't help noticing how busy things are at night. Deliveries at odd hours, perhaps. Her question was gentle, but her eyes were sharp, catching the flicker of alarm in Alfie's face. He hesitated, then muttered, Some folks don't keep regular hours. Part of the job. He tipped his cap and moved to assist a guest, effectively ending the conversation. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Alfie's deflection was telling, echoing the guarded responses of Edwin and Lillian. She decided to press further, but indirectly. The hotel's garden, visible from her window, had been a stage for fleeting figures, and she suspected Alfie's duties extended beyond the front door. She strolled to the garden's entrance, a Rottian gate tucked behind a hedge, and pretended to admire the roses. The garden was quiet, its paths lined with gravel that crunched underfoot. As she bent to inspect a bloom, she noticed a scuff mark near the gate, as if someone had dragged something heavy. Kneeling, she found a shred of burlap caught on a thorn, its coarse texture suggesting a sack perhaps for a delivery. She tucked the shred into her handkerchief, her mind linking it to the van and Alfie's unease. Returning to the lobby, she spotted Alfie near the porter's desk, sorting a stack of parcels. She approached, her umbrella tapping the floor. Alfie, I wonder if you could help me, she said, her voice soft. I'm expecting a small package from my nephew book, nothing grand. Do you handle deliveries yourself, or do they go? Through the staff, Alfie's jaw tightened, but he met her gaze. Depends, Ms. Most go through the desk, but some special ones I take care of. He lowered his voice, glancing at the clerk, who was busy with a guest. Look, you seem a nice lady. Don't go poking around deliveries. It's not safe. Miss Marple's eyes widened, feigning surprise. Not safe? Goodness, I only meant my book. But you sound as if you've seen something troubling. Alfie shifted, his hands fidgeting with a parcel's label. For a moment, she thought he'd retreat, but then he leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. I don't want trouble, miss, but they've got me running errands, things I don't like. Last week, I took a package to an alley off Baker Street. Shady type there, didn't give his name. Said it was for the boss. I don't know more, and I don't want to. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. That sounds most distressing, Alfie, she said. Who's this boss? Surely not Mr. Langley. Alfie flinched at the name, confirming her suspicion. I've said too much, he muttered, stepping back. Just watch yourself. Miss, he turned away, busying himself with the parcels. Miss Marple retreated to the lounge, her mind racing. Alfie's confession tied him to the mysterious package from the basement meeting, and his mention of a boss pointed to Langley or someone higher. The alley off Baker Street was a new clue, and the burlap shred suggested a physical delivery. Perhaps contraband. She recalled the coded scrap 47-19-82 LS, and wondered if it referenced a location or a transaction tied to that alley. To test her theory, she visited the hotel's reading room, a quiet nook with newspapers, and a map of London pinned to the wall. She traced Baker Street, noting its proximity to the hotel less than a mile. An alley there could be a discreet drop point, away from prying eyes. She jotted the coordinates in her notebook, her thoughts turning to the brass key Clara had entrusted to her. A safety deposit box might hold records of such transactions, and she resolved to locate it as evening fell. Miss Marple dined in the hotel restaurant, choosing a table near a pillar to observe unobtrusively. Clara Vane was absent, likely avoiding scrutiny after her confession, but Miss Dubois, the woman in the emerald green coat, sat alone, her hands trembling as she stirred her soup. Miss Marple noted her pallor, wondering if she, too, was caught in the blackmail web or tied to Alfie's deliveries. After dinner, she lingered in the lobby, hoping to catch Alfie again. Instead, she saw Edwin, the concierge, speaking to a man in a dark suit near the staircase. The man's posture was rigid, his gestures sharp, and Miss Marple's breath caught he matched the description of the scarred man from the basement. She couldn't see his face, but his presence confirmed the operation's reach within the hotel. She approached the concierge desk, feigning a question about train schedules, but her eyes followed the man as he slipped into the lift and Wynn's smile was strained as he handed her a timetable. "Anything else, Miss Marple?" he asked. His tone clipped. "No, thank you," she replied, her mind elsewhere. The man's departure to the upper floors suggested a meeting. Perhaps in room 312. She couldn't follow without risking exposure. But Alfie's tale had given her enough to pursue. Back in her room, Miss Marple examined the burlap shred under her lamp. Its weave was coarse, stained with a faint oily residue, perhaps from machinery or forged documents. She hid it with the key and the coded scrap, her knitting bag a growing repository of clues. Alfie's confession was a breakthrough, linking the staff to an external operation. The alley off Baker Street was her next lead, and she would find a way to explore it discreetly. The chapter closed as Miss Marple sat by her window, the fog outside mirroring the mystery within. Alfie's reluctant admission had exposed a crack in Bertram's facade, revealing a network of deliveries and shadowy figures. The brass key weighed heavily in her thoughts, a promise of answers. Tomorrow she would seek the safety deposit box and watch for the scarred man, determined to unravel the hotel's dark underbelly, one careful step at a time. Chapter 7. A midnight intruder. The moon hung low over Bertram's hotel, its silver light filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's room. She sat in an armchair, her knitting untouched, her mind weaving together the threads of the mystery, the midnight delivery note, the blackmail letter tied to room 312, the coded scrap from Mr. Harrow's vanished room, Mr. Langley's clandestine meeting, Clara Vane's brass key, and Alfie's confession about a shady delivery in an alley off Baker Street. Each clue pointed to a criminal network operating beneath the hotel's polished surface, and Miss Marple was determined to catch its next move tonight. The hotel was hosting a recital in the Grand Salon, a string quartet playing Mozart to a gathering of guests. Miss Marple had excused herself early, claiming fatigue, but her true intent was to guard her room. The brass key, hidden in the false bottom of her knitting bag alongside the coded scrap and burlap shred, was too valuable to leave unattended. She suspected the hotel's watchful staff-eyed Wynne, Lillian, Alfie, and perhaps Langley himself might be searching for such clues, and she was prepared to outwit them. She dimmed her lamp, leaving just enough light to cast shadows, and arranged her knitting bag on the bedside table. Its contents secure, but tempting to a curious intruder. She settled into a backed chair by the wardrobe, partially concealed by its shadow, and waited, her senses sharp as her needles. The distant strains of the quartet drifted through the walls, masking smaller sounds, but Miss Marple's ears were attuned to the corridor beyond. At 11:30, a faint click came from her door key turning in the lock. She held her breath as the door eased open, revealing a sliver of light from the hall. A figure slipped inside, moving with the stealth of a cat. The intruder was slight, dressed in the dark uniform of a junior staff member, their face obscured by a cap pulled low. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she remained still, her eyes tracking the figure's movements. The intruder approached the bedside table, pausing to scan the room. They lifted the knitting bag, their fingers probing its contents with practiced care. Miss Marple had anticipated this, leaving a decoy folded handkerchief stuffed with paper to mimic the weight of her clues. The intruder hesitated, then set the bag down, apparently satisfied it held nothing of value. They moved to the desk, rifling through her notepaper, then checked the wardrobe. Their movements swift but silent. Miss Marple's mind raced. The intruder's familiarity with the room suggested they were staff, possibly acting on orders. She noted their slight build and the way their cap tilted an echo of Alfie's, though this figure was shorter. As they turned toward the window, the moonlight caught their profile, revealing a young woman's face, her jaw set with determination. Miss Marple didn't recognize her, but the uniform bore the hotel's crest, confirming her suspicions of an inside job. The intruder paused at the window, peering into the garden below, as if checking for watchers. Miss Marple seized the moment, coughing softly, a deliberate sound, like a guest stirring in sleep. The woman froze, then bolted for the door, her cap slipping to reveal a shock of dark curls. She was gone before Miss Marple could rise, the door clicking shut behind her. Miss Marple exhaled, her hands steady despite the adrenaline. The intrusion was a bold move, proof that someone, likely Langley or his boss, suspected she was probing too closely. She checked her knitting bag, confirming the key, scrap, and burlap shred were safe in the false bottom. The decoy had worked, but the intruder's search suggested urgency. Were they after the key or something else? She decided to use the recital's cover to investigate further. Slipping into the corridor, she descended to the grand salon, where the quartet's final notes were fading to applause. Guests mingled, sipping sherry, their faces flushed with the evening's charm. Clara Vane stood near a marble bust, her grey dress shimmering in the chandelier's light, but her eyes were anxious, scanning the crowd. Miss Dubois, in her emerald green coat, lingered by the exit, her expression haunted. Mr. Reginald Poole was absent, but Lady Beatrice Worthington chatted with the group. Her laughter brittle. Miss Marple approached Clara, her smile disarming. "Lovely evening, isn't it, Miss Vane? Though I confess, I find these events a touch overwhelming." Clara's lips curved, but her gaze was wary. "They can be," she said. "Too many eyes, sometimes." She lowered her voice. "Have you found anything about the key?" "Not yet," Miss Marple replied, her tone soothing. "But I'm keeping it safe. Have you noticed anything unusual tonight?" Clara hesitated, then whispered, "The staff, they've been watching me more closely. That maid, Dora, was in my room earlier, tidying," she said, but she lingered too long. Miss Marple nodded, recalling Dora from Mr. Harrow's room. Could she be the intruder? The description didn't match the intruder's curls versus Dora's tight bun, but the staff's involvement was clear. "Thank you, my dear," she said. "Stay cautious. I'll let you know what I find." As Clara rejoined the crowd, Miss Marple scanned the room for the intruder. No one matched her profile, but she spotted Edwin, the concierge, near the entrance, his eyes tracking the guests. His gaze lingered on Miss Dubois, who hurried out as the recital ended. Miss Marple followed at a distance, her steps silent on the carpeted hall. Miss Dubois headed toward the garden, her coat a flash of green in the moonlight. Miss Marple paused at the glass doors, watching as the woman stopped by the wrought iron gate, where Miss Marple had found the burlap shred. Miss Dubois knelt, as if searching for something, then stood abruptly and slipped through the gate, vanishing into the night. Miss Marple's lips pursed. The garden was a recurring stage for secrets, and Miss Dubois's actions suggested she was part of the delivery network Alfie had described. She considered following, but deemed it too risky. Instead, she returned to her room, locking the door and re-examining her clues. The intruder's search had targeted her knitting bag, suggesting they knew or suspected she held something valuable. The brass key was the likely target, given its tie to Clara's blackmail and the hotel's operations. Miss Marple tested it against her own room key, noting its distinct shape, likely for a safety deposit box, as Clara had guessed. The hotel's office, behind the reception desk, was the most logical place for such a box, but accessing it would require cunning. She sat at her desk, jotting notes to clarify her thoughts. The intruder's youth and uniform pointed to a junior staff member, possibly acting on Langley's orders. The coded scrap 471982LS might reference a box number or a transaction tied to the alley drop. Alfie's tale of the shady figure in Baker Street suggested forged documents or contraband, and Miss Dubois's garden excursion hinted at a drop point. As midnight approached, Miss Marple moved her knitting bag to a new hiding spot inside. A hollowed-out novel on her shelf, a trick learned from a St. Mary Mead librarian. The key, scrap, and burlap shred were secure, but the intrusion had heightened her caution. She resolved to visit the hotel office tomorrow, perhaps under the guise of inquiring about a lost item. The chapter closed as Miss Marple gazed out her window, the garden now cloaked in darkness. The intruder's visit was a warning, but also a victory. She'd protected her clues and gained insight into the hotel's vigilance. The young woman's face, briefly glimpsed, was a new thread to follow, and Miss Dubois's nocturnal errand added urgency to her quest. With the key safe and her resolve firm, Miss Marple was ready to probe deeper, peeling back another layer of Bertram's dark underbelly. Chapter 8. The Syndicate Unraveled. The morning sun pierced the fog outside Bertram's hotel, casting long shadows across the lobby's marble floor. Miss Jane Marple sat in a plush armchair near the reception desk, her knitting bag at her side, its hidden compartment safeguarding Clara Vane's brass key, the coded scrap from Mr. Harrow's room, and the burlap shred from the garden. The clues she'd gathered: the midnight delivery note, the blackmail letter tied to room 312, Mr. Langley's basement meeting, Alfie's alley confession, and the midnight intruder pointed to a criminal syndicate operating within the hotel's elegant facade. Today, she aimed to unlock the key's secret and expose the heart of the operation. The lobby hummed with activity, guests checking out, porters ferrying luggage, and Edwin, the concierge, managing it all with his polished smile. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, noted his quick glances toward the manager's office, a discreet door behind the desk. She suspected it housed the safety deposit box tied to Clara's key, and she needed access without arousing suspicion. She approached the desk, her manner unassuming. "Good morning, Edwin," she said, her voice warm. "I seem to have misplaced a brooch, nothing valuable, but sentimental. Might I check the hotel's lost property, perhaps in the office?" Edwin's smile faltered, his fingers twitching on a ledger. "Lost property is usually kept in storage, Miss Marple. I can have someone check for you." "Oh, I'd rather look myself," she replied, her tone insistent yet polite. "It's a small thing, easily overlooked. Surely the office has a box for such items." Edwin hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, I'll escort you." He led her to the office, unlocking the door with a key from his chain. Inside, the room was tidy, with a mahogany desk, a filing cabinet, and a row of numbered safety deposit boxes along one wall. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The boxes matched the style of Clara's key dart as Edwin rummaged through a drawer. Feigning a search for her brooch, Miss Marple scanned the boxes. Number 47 caught her eye, its brass plate gleaming. The coded scrap 471982 LS flashed in her mind. Could 47 be the box number? She needed to test the key, but Edwin's presence made it impossible. "Thank you, Edwin," she said, as he produced a tray of stray earrings and pins. "It's not here, but I appreciate your trouble." She left the office, her mind racing. The box was her target, but she needed a distraction to return unnoticed, back in the lobby. She spotted Clara Vane, her face pale as she lingered near the staircase. Miss Marple approached, her voice low. "Miss Vane, I believe the key fits." "A box in the manager's office. I'll try to access it today. Stay out of sight, someone's watching." Clara nodded, her eyes wide. "I saw that maid, Dora, near my room again. She's too curious. Be careful, Miss Marple." Miss Marple returned to her room, devising a plan. The hotel's afternoon tea was a busy affair, drawing staff and guests alike. It would provide cover to slip into the office. She hid the key in her sleeve, a precaution after the intruder's visit, and prepared a small Russa-spilled tea tray to distract Edwin. At tea, the dining room was crowded, the clink of china mingling with laughter. Miss Marple chose a table near the service door, where Lillian, the waitress, was balancing a tray of scones. As Lillian passed, Miss Marple nudged a spoon to the floor, causing the waitress to stumble. The tray crashed, drawing gasps in Edwin's attention. "Oh dear," Miss Marple exclaimed, feigning dismay. "I'm so sorry, Lillian." As staff rushed to clean the mess, Miss Marple slipped into the corridor, her steps swift. The manager's office was unlocked, likely due to the chaos. She entered, her heart pounding, and approached box 47. The brass key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. Inside was a leather folder, its contents heavy. She opened it, revealing a stack of documents, ledgers, receipts, and what appeared to be forged banknotes, all stamped with a crest she didn't recognize. A single sheet listed transactions with else's, scrawled beside sums in the thousands. The numbers 19 and 82 appeared repeatedly, possibly dates or codes for shipments. Miss Marple's breath caught. This was evidence of a scheme, likely tied to the alley deliveries Alfie described. The crest suggested a syndicate and LS. Perhaps Langley's initials or a code for the scarred man confirmed the hotel's role as a front. She memorized key details, knowing she couldn't take the documents without alerting the culprits. Voices in the corridors startled her. She locked the box, pocketed the key, and slipped behind the filing cabinet, Just as the door opened, Mr. Langley entered, his face tense, speaking to someone unseen. "The next shipment's tomorrow," he said. "If it's late again, we're finished. Get it right." A familiar voice snapped the scarred man from the basement. "The boss won't wait." Their footsteps faded, and Miss Marple exhaled, her hands trembling. She returned to the dining room, where the tea service had resumed. Lillian shot her a curious glance, but Miss Marple's serene smile gave nothing away. She rejoined Clara, who was sipping tea nervously. "It's done," Miss Marple whispered. The key opened a box with evidence-forged notes, ledgers. "We need to act carefully." Clara's eyes widened. "What now?" "We need the police." Miss Marple said, "I have a contact at Scotland Yard, Inspector Craddock. I'll telephone him discreetly. Stay in your room tonight, don't go near 312. As evening fell, Miss Marple used the hotel's public telephone, a secluded booth. In the lobby, she reached Inspector Craddock, her nephew's old friend, and relayed her findings. The blackmail, the coded scrap, the deliveries, and the documents in Box 47. "It's a syndicate, Inspector," she said. "Money laundering, possibly forgery. Run through the hotel. Mr. Langley's involved. And there's a man with a scar likely there, enforcer." Craddock's voice was grave. "I'll send men tomorrow, Miss Marple, but we need solid evidence. Can you secure those documents?" "Not yet," she replied, "but I'll ensure they're safe until you arrive." She hung up, her resolve firm. The documents were too dangerous to retrieve now, but the key was her leverage. She returned to her room, hiding it in the hollowed-out novel, alongside the scrap and burlap shred. The intruder's visit had taught her caution, and she checked her doors locked twice as she prepared for bed. A faint noise came from the Gardner Russell, like footsteps on gravel. She peered out, seeing a figure near the gate, too distant to identify. It wasn't Miss Dubois, whose green coat was unmistakable, but the movement echoed her nocturnal errand. The garden was a hub, and Miss Marple suspected another delivery was imminent. She sat, her knitting resumed to steady her nerves. The documents confirmed the syndicate's scope, tying the blackmail, deliveries, and Harrow's disappearance into a single operation. Langley's involvement was clear, and the scarred man's presence suggested an external leader, a boss, pulling the strings. The numbers 19 and 82 might pinpoint the next shipment, and she'd watch for it. The chapter closed as Miss Marple gazed at the darkened garden, the key's weight a silent promise. The syndicate was unraveling, its secrets exposed by the contents of Box 47. With Scotland Yard alerted, she was one step closer to dismantling Bertram's dark underbelly, but the scarred man's threat loomed large. Tomorrow she'd ensure. The evidence was ready, her careful stitches tightening around the hotel's hidden truth. Chapter 9. The trap is set. The grand salon of Bertram's hotel glittered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, its polished floors reflecting the elegance of the annual gala. Guests in evening attire mingled, their laughter mingling with the clink of champagne flutes and the soft strains of a waltz. Miss Jane Marple stood near a velvet-draped window, her modest black dress and pearl brooch blending into the crowd, though her sharp eyes missed nothing. The clues she'd gathered: the midnight delivery note, the blackmail letter tied to room 312, the coded scrap from Mr. Harrow's room, Mr. Langley's basement meeting, Clara Vane's brass key, Alfie's alley confession, the midnight intruder, and the forged documents in safety deposit box 47 had revealed a money laundering syndicate operating within the hotel. Tonight, She would set a trap to catch its key players. Miss Marple had spent the morning in discreet communication with Inspector Craddock of Scotland Yard, outlining her findings, the syndicate's use of the hotel as a front, Langley's role, and the scarred man's enforcement. Craddock had agreed to a sting operation during the gala, when the hotel's bustle would mask their presence. Miss Marple's plan was simple but bold: plant false information about a new delivery to lure the syndicate into action, forcing them to reveal themselves. She had enlisted Clara Vane, whose trust she'd earned, to spread the bait. Clara, stationed near the grand staircase, wore a sapphire gown that drew eyes, her actresses poised, masking her nerves. Miss Marple had coached her to mention, within earshot of the staff, that a special package was arriving at midnight. In the garden, a ruse designed to draw out Langley and his accomplices. Clara's role was subtle casual remarks to Lillian and Dora, the watchful maid ensuring the rumour reached the right ears. Miss Marple scanned the salon, noting the players in her drama. Mr. Langley, impeccably dressed in a tuxedo, circulated. Among the guests, his smile as polished as the silverware but strained at the edges. Miss Dubois, in a silver gown rather than her usual green coat, hovered near a buffet table, her fingers twisting a napkin. Alfie, stationed at the salon's entrance, adjusted his cap nervously, his eyes darting to Langley. Edwin, the concierge, managed the guest list, his movements brisk but tense. Lady Beatrice Worthington and Mr. Reginald Poole were present, there. Faces taut, as if sensing the undercurrents. Miss Marple approached Clara, her voice low. "You've done well, my dear. I heard you mention the package to Lillian. Has anyone else taken notice?" Clara nodded, her lips barely moving. Dora was nearby when I spoke. She lingered, pretending to adjust a vase. And I saw Edwin watching. Me earlier, they're listening. "Good," Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming. "Stay visible, but safe. The police are nearby, in plain clothes." She'd spotted Craddock's men too in waiters' uniforms, one posing as a guest blending seamlessly into the crowd. As the evening progressed, Miss Marple moved through the salon, her small figure unassuming but her senses alert. She paused, near Alfie, offering a smile. "Such a splendid event, Alfie," she said, "though I imagine it's a busy night for deliveries, with so many guests." Alfie's jaw tightened, his hand brushing his pocket. "Aye, miss. Always something to do." His glance toward Langley confirmed her suspicions. He was waiting for a signal. She drifted to a table where Miss Dubois sat, her silver gown shimmering but her face pale. "Miss Dubois, you look lovely," Miss Marple said, settling beside her, though you seem a touch distracted. "Is everything all right?" Miss Dubois flinched, her napkin crumpling. "Just the noise of the gala," she murmured, her French accent thicker under stress. "I'm not used to such crowds." She rose abruptly, heading toward the garden doors. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Miss Dubois's unease suggested she was involved. In the delivery, perhaps coerced like Alfie, she signaled Craddock, disguised as a waiter, with a subtle nod, and he followed Miss Dubois at a distance. The trap was tightening. As the clock neared midnight, Miss Marple positioned herself near the garden entrance, a glass of lemonade in hand to maintain her cover. The music swelled, masking quieter movements, but she caught a glimpse of Langley slipping through a side door, followed by a man whose sharp jawline and scarred eyebrow matched the figure from the basement. Her pulse quickened. The enforcer was here. She edged closer to the garden, where the moonlight illuminated the gravel paths. Langley and the scarred man stood by the wrought iron gate, their voices low but urgent. "The package better be here," the scarred man hissed. "The boss is done waiting." "It's coming," Langley replied, his tone defensive. The alley drop was clean. Alfie handled it. Miss Marple's heart raced. The false delivery had drawn them out, just as she'd hoped. She signaled Craddock again, who nodded to his men. As Langley opened the gate, expecting the fictional package, two plainclothes officers emerged from the shadows, their badges glinting. "Mr. Langley, you're under arrest," Craddock said, his voice firm, "for suspicion of money laundering and forgery." The scarred man bolted, but a third officer blocked the gate, apprehending him. Langley's face drained of colour, his hands raised in surrender. Miss Marple watched from the doorway, her expression serene, but her mind alight with satisfaction. The trap had worked, catching the syndicate's key players in the act of expecting an illicit delivery. As the police escorted Langley and the scarred man away, Miss Marple returned to the salon, where Clara approached, her eyes wide. "Did it work?" she whispered. "Yes, my dear," Miss Marple replied. "The police have them. Your courage made this possible." Clara exhaled, her shoulders relaxing. "And the blackmail?" "We'll address it," Miss Marple assured her. "The documents in box 47 will help." She'd shared the box's location with Craddock, ensuring the evidence would be seized. The gala continued, oblivious to the drama outside. Miss Dubois reappeared, her face ashen, and Miss Marple suspected she'd seen the arrests. Alfie, still at his post, looked shaken, his cap askew. Miss Marple approached him, her voice gentle. "You did what you had to, Alfie. The police will understand." He nodded, his gruff exterior cracking. "Didn't want to hurt no one. Miss just got in too deep." Miss Marple returned to her room, the brass key still safe in her novel. She sat by the window, gazing at the garden now quiet under the moon. The arrests were a triumph, but the syndicate's boss remained at large, and Miss Dubois's role was unclear. The documents in box 47 would reveal more, and Craddock's men would secure them by morning. The chapter closed as Miss Marple reflected on the night's success. The trap had snared Langley and his enforcer, exposing the syndicate's operations. Clara's blackmail, Harrow's disappearance, and the alley deliveries were tied to the forged notes, and the police were now poised to dismantle the network. Yet the shadow of the unseen boss lingered, urging her to remain vigilant. With the key in her clues secure, Miss Marple was ready for the final unravelling of Bertram's dark underbelly. Chapter 10. The final unmasking. The morning after the gala at Bertram's hotel was serene. The lobby bathed in soft sunlight that belied the turmoil of the previous night. Miss Jane Marple stood in the hotel's lounge, her knitting bag at her side, its hidden compartment still holding Clara Vane's brass key, the coded scrap from Mr. Harrow's room, and the burlap shred from the garden. The clues she'd gathered: the midnight delivery note, the blackmail letter tied to room 312, Mr. Langley's basement meeting, Alfie's alley confession, the midnight intruder, and the forged documents in safety deposit box 47 had culminated in the arrests of Langley and the scarred enforcer. Yet the syndicate's elusive boss and the fates of Miss Dubois and Mr. Harrow remained unresolved. Today, Miss Marple would lay bare the hotel's dark underbelly for all to see. Inspector Craddock had arrived at dawn, his men securing the documents from box 47. The ledgers and forged banknotes confirmed a money laundering scheme, with transactions linked to an offshore account under the initials LS. Miss Marple had requested a gathering in the lounge to explain the mystery to the remaining guests and staff, a final act to ensure justice. Craddock agreed, stationing officers discreetly around the room. The lounge was arranged with chairs in a semicircle, its velvet curtains drawn to let in the morning light. Clara Vane sat near the front, her sapphire gown replaced by a simple cream dress, her face a mix of relief and anxiety. Miss Dubois, pale and withdrawn, occupied a corner seat, her hands clasped tightly. Alfie, the doorman, stood by the door, his cap in hand, his expression sombre. Lady Beatrice Worthington and Mr. Reginald Poole were present, their earlier replaced by unease. Lillian and Dora, the watchful staff, lingered at the back, their faces guarded. Edwin, the concierge, was absent, detained for questioning after his role in the syndicate surfaced. Miss Marple stepped forward, her small figure commanding the room's attention. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and steady. "You've all been part of an extraordinary week at Bertram's hotel, though not for the reasons you might expect. Beneath its charm, this place has hidden a dark secret, criminal syndicate dealing in blackmail, forgery, and money laundering. Today, I'll explain how it was uncovered and who was involved." The room was silent, all eyes on her. She began with the note she'd found on her first day, hinting at a midnight delivery. "It was a small thing," she said, "but it suggested something amiss." Then, a letter dropped by Lady Beatrice revealed blackmail tied to room 312. Lady Beatrice flushed, her hands twisting her pearls, but Miss Marple's tone was kind. "You were a victim, madam, not a culprit." She recounted Mr. Harrow's disappearance, the coded scrap 47-19-82 LS, found in his room, and its link to the safety deposit box. Mr. Harrow, I learned, was no ordinary guest. He was a courier for the syndicate, tasked with delivering forged documents. When he grew nervous, perhaps intending to betray his employers, he vanished, likely taken to ensure his silence. Gasps rippled through the room. Miss Marple continued, describing Alfie's reluctant confession about the alley drop-off baker. Street Alfie bowed his head, and she nodded to him. "You were coerced, Alfie, and your honesty helped unravel this web. The police will consider your cooperation." She turned to Clara, her gaze softening. Miss Vane, too, was a victim of blackmail, her past used against her. Her courage in sharing her story and entrusting me with a key to box 47 was pivotal. That box held evidence of a money laundering operation with forged banknotes and ledgers pointing to a mastermind known only as L.S. Clara's eyes glistened, and Miss Marple pressed on, detailing the midnight intruder Junior maid, named Elsie, now in custody, who'd searched her room on orders from Mr. Langley. Langley, the hotel manager, was a key player, she said. I overheard him in a basement meeting discussing a late package with a scarred Manan enforcer for the syndicate. Their arrests last night, during a staged delivery, were the result of careful planning with Scotland Yard. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. But the question remained, who was L.S., the boss behind it all? The initials appeared in the ledgers, tied to an offshore account. I suspected someone within the hotel, someone with authority and access. Miss Dubois shifted, her face ashen. Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. Miss Dubois, you've been troubled since I arrived. Your late-night visits to the garden, your nervous exchanges, I believe you know more than you've shared. The room tensed as Miss Dubois rose, her voice trembling. I didn't want to be part of it, she said, her French accent thick. My brother, Lucien Sauveterre Esqui forced me. He runs the syndicate using the hotel as a front. I delivered packages to protect my family, but I never meant harm. Murmurs filled the room, and Craddock signaled an officer to approach Miss Dubois. Miss Marple raised a hand. "One moment, Inspector." "Miss Dubois, where is your brother now?" Tears streamed down her face. "He fled last night, after the gala. He knew the police were closing in. He's likely in Paris by now." Nodded, taking notes. "Will alert Interpol." "Thank you, Miss Dubois. Your cooperation will help." Miss Marple turned to the group. The syndicate used Bertrams to launder money through forged notes, blackmailing guests like Miss Vane and Lady Beatrice to fund their operations. Mr. Harrow's disappearance was a warning to others, but his coded scrap led us to the truth. The documents in Box 47, now with Scotland Yard, will ensure justice. She addressed Clara. "Your blackmailer is in custody, my dear. The notes are destroyed, and your secret is safe." Clara's shoulders relaxed, a smile breaking through. Her tears to Alfie, she said, "Your part is known, and your help was invaluable. The police will be fair." Alfie nodded, his relief palpable. Finally, she faced the room. Bertram's charm was a facade, but facades crumble under scrutiny. The syndicate is dismantled, its leaders caught or fleeing. The hotel may recover, but its secrets are no more. The guests applauded softly, their tension easing. Craddock approached Miss Marple, his voice low. "You've done it again, Miss Marple. We've got enough to shut this down for good. Harrow's been found alive, in hiding. He'll testify, Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I'm glad, Inspector. Now, I think I'll enjoy a quiet tea before I leave." As the group dispersed, Clara embraced her, whispering, "Thank you." Miss Dubois, escorted by an officer, offered a grateful nod. Alfie tipped his cap, his gruff face softened. Lady Beatrice and Mr. Poole slipped away, their secrets safe but their pride chastened. Miss Marple returned to her room, packing her knitting bag, the key and clues no longer needed. She gazed at the garden, now bathed in sunlight, its shadows gone. The hotel's dark underbelly was exposed, its players unmasked. She reflected on the fragility of appearances, how a single dropped note had unraveled a criminal empire. With her suitcase packed, she left Bertram's, her heart light, content that justice had been served. The chapter and the story closed as Miss Marple stepped into a waiting taxi, her eyes bright with the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. The hotel's elegance would endure, but its secrets would not. She leaned back, thinking of St. Mary Mead, where simpler mysteries awaited, and smiled. The world was full of facades, but none could withstand the quiet scrutiny of Jane Marple.